Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Clint Russell, who's the host of Liberty Lockdown. He is a libertarian and a mortgage broker, so he's into finance, and he's also been quite politically active since the 2020 response by the U.S. government and governments the world round to the COVID-19 pandemic. In this conversation, we talk about his take on the current political situation with the recent re-election of Donald J. Trump and what that means for liberty-minded individuals and his priorities as a libertarian. Fascinating chap. You can find links to his work down there in the description, as well as links to support this content if you feel so moved. Without further ado, here is Clint Russell. Testing.
I can hear you.
Hear me? Oh, okay. You can hear me. How you doing?
Good. Can you hear me though?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, cool.
I know.
Sorry. Yeah, I had Ben Swan and Tom Woods this morning, and then they like both flipped on me, and then I ended up doing one and not the other, and I don't know what the fuck's going on. So I'm just like, hey, I messaged you because I thought there was going to be one, a conflict, and two, because I'm completely fucking worn out. And then I was like, well, now this slot opened back up, so maybe we can do it. I don't know.
Well, let's see what happens.
I need a break so bad, dude. I'm sorry.
Yeah, really? Why? Why is this so intense for you? Why this time of year? Why this election?
Well, no, I don't think it's this time. Well, I mean, it is certainly this time of year. There's added stress, but I think I'm just worn out. You know, I've just been so locked in and focused on everything that's going on with the election, sure, but really with the country. You know, I carry too much of it with me, I think. You know, a lot of people that are in this world, I think it becomes a job to them. It's a hobby. It basically becomes like a soap opera that they're watching. And I haven't managed to do that myself, where I can just kind of disconnect and go like, no, this is you know, this isn't that big of a deal. This isn't that important. It's like, no, actually, it's extremely important. like this is the fate of humanity on the line. And I genuinely believe that. So I think that's the gravity of that wears on me.
Yeah. The Democrats use that rhetoric and have used that rhetoric with increasing intensity for as long as I remember, but probably post-Bush, like this is the election that's going to change the fate of the nation has been like increasingly their talking point. Do you think that you've been rhetorically, like dialectically trapped in that, or that's just the landscape of the political rhetoric, or is there substance?
No, there's substance, because there's definitely substance, because I was not one of those people. I have never been like vote or die. You know, I've never been one of those guys. My entire life I've been watching the political machine, and for the most part I haven't even told people to vote. You know, I've never been involved on that level. So no, there is a grain of truth to every time they say that, because every time they say that, the federal government is larger. So because of that, this election is more important than last time. But I think that we're now at an inflection point where it is actually existential. Like, we are on the precipice of World War III when it comes to the Russia dynamic. I'm not at all optimistic that Donald Trump will avoid war with Iran, but he didn't do it last time, so I have to fingers crossed on that one. But I think that the biggest crisis is the war in Ukraine, the proxy war against Russia, the kind of geopolitical realignment that we're witnessing. Also, the U.S. dollar's reserve currency status is in serious threat because of the BRICS alliance. I mean, these are things that are much, much bigger than, oh, Donald Trump is not going to leave on January, you know, like that type of stuff. You know, I'm not falling for the fear mongering stuff. These are actual things that they don't ever talk about, I might add. Like, these are really important topics. So that's the reason.
Is there something about them not talking about it that makes it even more important? And how do you know which things that aren't being talked about are not being talked about on purpose? That's a weird question, but
sure,
because you can easily fall into conspiratorial mindset, like trying to look at the gaps. Like, you can just like fill in the gaps because the gaps are everywhere. But why are these issues, you think, so essential and yet overlooked?
Yeah, well, I think that in part it's because the parties have flipped, and that the Democrats represent the military-industrial complex at this point, whereas the kind of MAGA dissident right-wing rebellion no longer is really in alignment with that, or certainly not in lockstep anymore. So I think that broadly speaking, war is still unpopular to the average Democrat. Like, it's hard to sell it to them because they spent their entire lives being convinced that the war on terror was a mistake, and they were right. It was a mistake. But guess what? The proxy war in Ukraine is also a mistake, and it was also sold to us on lies. So I think that's the issue. Is I recognize, basically, because thankfully for Scott Horton and his incredible book Provoked, I understand the history of that conflict very well, the lead up to it, the Maidan Revolution, and even years prior to that. I mean, this is a long time coming. So the fact that they haven't talked about any of it doesn't surprise me. The fact that they continue to try and sell it on this pretense of defending democracy while they have canceled elections and there's really nothing to do with democracy in Ukraine, or the fact that they hide all of the corruption that goes on in Ukraine, or the fact that they have genuine Nazi battalions in Ukraine. Like, they hide all of the things that would be unappealing to their Democrat voting base because they want them to support endless funding for this war under the pretense of defending democracy, which ties into the narrative about January 6th and how you have to defeat Donald Trump because we have to defend democracy. I mean, these are the narratives that they have laid out to sell the Democrats on endless war. So that's the reason that I recognize it for what it is that, to me, it's quite obvious that it's basically an operation to try and get them in line.
Have you always been political, or was this like an accidental happening somewhere on your life journey?
I mean, I've always been, I guess, more politically aware than most people. Bear. Yeah. My dad ran for Congress twice in the 90s as a Libertarian, and I was a kid, but I only spent 1 weekend a month with him because I was raised by my mom and my stepdad primarily. But when I was with him, we would talk about libertarianism and politics and our founding and our founding fathers. So I certainly have an unusual upbringing in that regard, and it has led me down this path. But in terms of actually being a commentator on politics, no, this is a pure mistake. I mean, they screwed up majorly. They locked down the country and they created a monster. So that's why I exist now.
More than one. So could you give my audience just a frame of reference? Like, what was it about the response to COVID that put you on a trajectory to being a commentator and quite staunch defender of liberty? I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for those that aren't familiar with me, the name of my show is Liberty Lockdown. It was obviously very inspired by that. It was created in, I think it was May of 2020, if not sooner. So it was right after the lockdowns, right after I basically went out and prepped and bought enough food to survive, and water and silver and steel and
what? How many drums of oil did you take with you?
No oil. I didn't go that far, but I was very nervous. I mean, people need to remember, like, if you weren't in a blue state, this may not be your experience. But I was in California at the time. I'm a lifetime Californian. It was nuts. I mean, they shut down the beaches. They shut down every restaurant. Everything you wanted to do was just gone. Almost overnight. Yeah. And, I mean, they shut down everything. It was unbelievable. The only thing they kept open was box stores, like the big box stores, and we had no guidance on when things were going to reopen. Like, first it was 2 weeks, and then it was a month, and then it was 3 months, and it was like it just kept extending. And I was like, this is because my background is in finance. I was running a mortgage company at the time. I understand that, like, because of the debt carry that exists in this country, if you shut down the country and people can't work for even a month or 2 months, the economic fallout from that is catastrophic. So I was very nervous about what was going on. I mean, this was like Alex Jones level infinity. Who thought over an airborne pathogen that you would lock us down? Like, what are we doing here? So yeah, I absolutely radicalized in that moment. I was like, this is crazy. I went to the beach and I meditated for like an hour and a half, and I was just like, this is the day of lockdowns when they told us we couldn't go on the beaches effective tomorrow. I went and I just sat there on the beach, and I was just thinking to myself, like, what am I going to do? And I was like, well, I got a microphone. Let's I was anonymous at the time. I don't even think I had 10,000 followers on Twitter. And I just started to scream into a microphone and did it without even video, and no one knew what I looked like or who I was or, my background. And I quickly found a very significant audience because I mirrored the anger and the anxiety that so many people were dealing with.
One of the horrors of 2020, the lockdown specifically, is not just what the government did, but that people went along with it en masse. Like, that says something about our culture getting to a point. What do you think was like some of the main factors of why people were so readily interested in relinquishing their freedoms and swapping out safety for liberty?
Man, that's a hard one. Because I am so built not that way. I have struggled to relate to these people for the past 4 years. Yeah. I think I understand it. I think I understand that many of these people are. This is going to sound very mean, but I think it's true. I think that Michael Malice's description that they are non-player characters, that they are just taking in inputs and then they're regurgitating. There's no actual critical thinking that's occurring. I blame it on, Malice will probably blame it on just low intelligence. I'll blame it on public schooling and the propaganda that we languish under that's so all-encompassing, from Hollywood to the political commentators to the news to public school to then you get into college and it's just a tripling down on the same propaganda you've been fed. I think that for the most part, these people are just crippled if they don't have an authority figure that leads them to the promised land. And for them, it was just a full court press to turn Anthony Fauci into that leader. And for them, that was enough.
Yeah. Well, speaking of authority and leading people hither and yon, once you start speaking out, did you have to grapple with your own authority or with, like, how did you approach, and it probably didn't happen consciously, but maybe you'd studied internet and how, like, the internet can bring people to prominence and squash them overnight, like what?
No, I was totally unprepared for any of that.
When your voice hit the airwaves, what did you find in response? What came back at you? What was reflected about yourself to you?
Oh, what did I learn about myself? I mean, I definitely...
And this influencer thing, speaking.
Well, I mean, I guess I've learned... I've been fortunate in that my growth has not been... I mean, from most libertarians' perspective, they think that I've grown really fast. But like, if you look at a guy like my friend Ian Carroll, he went from 0 to 1 million plus in under a year. That is insane. That is the type of growth that can give you real problems with ego and things like that. And I'm not saying Ian is dealing with any of that. Maybe he is. I don't know. But for me, this was like a 5-year build. So. Yeah. To get to 200,000 followers, which literally just happened 2 days ago on Twitter.
Congrats. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think I've had any issues with that. I think that like my growth rate has been, consistent.
Were you able to sculpt your, I don't want to think in terms of persona as something fake, but like what kind of skills did you learn that you had or you had to develop on the fly over the course of the last 5 years?
Well, the reason I got involved in podcasting is because I think that what I loved so much about podcasting, like I am a huge podcast fan. Like I am an early adopter from 2010. I remember the first time I found the Joe Rogan Experience, I put it on and I listened until the sun came up. I could not get enough of it. I was just like, this is the authentic conversations I've been looking for my entire life. I mean, this is what me and my buddies do when we're drinking at our house. Like this is just amazing. I think it was episode 50, and I listened to like from 50 to 58 or something crazy like that. I just ran through his whole catalog. I could not get enough of it. So I don't think that you need to be anything. I don't think you need to be a character. Like I am this. This is who I am. So That's the whole, Dave Smith was another big inspiration for me to get involved in this. And I found him because of Joe Rogan in 2016 or whatever it was. And I immediately recognized in him the same thing that it is in me. We love this stuff. Like, we love thinking and reading and talking about these things. So I don't think you have to create a character. Like, I know a lot of people do, but I just don't think that's necessary.
Yeah. I think that part of the reason that the election, maybe not, shook out the way it did in favor of Trump was this realm that you're talking about, this podcast realm, that him and JD Vance were able to enter into that. And there's this other pedigreed realm. And I think that does map over to what you were saying about COVID. Like, there's this information circus or box that is established and has been established and has its own kind of inertial authority, right? The mainstream, the legacy, and the people who are plugged into that. I don't think they're necessarily NPCs. I think that there's a certain amount of things that they don't have to critically think about, that they outsource to other people, and that box, that media box, has sculpted that. And we see, especially since 2020, but before that, I think Gamergate was an early adoption of this split, or a viewpoint of this split, that there's the authentic community that exists online through media that's self-generated, of people just relating to each other like we do in normal life, but it's digitized. And then there's this adjacent legacy realm media that is vetted, that has better fonts and stuff like that. And I think that the win that Trump had this election had to do with there's this alternative reality from the mainstream media that is growing more and more legitimate, because more and more people are participating in it, not necessarily believing in it. And so I think that a lot of people, when we watch the mainstream media have meltdowns, and the people have meltdowns in the last few days, it's because they're in a different world. They haven't adopted, or they don't understand that there's this other way of communicating, of gathering and dispersing information.
Well, yeah, it's not. I don't think it's actually that they don't know it exists. I mean, these people have very high paid advisors. Some of them are young. Obviously, the podcasts are not brand new. I mean, we're talking 15 years. Okay. Like they know Joe Rogan exists. They tried to cancel Joe Rogan. Okay, like that happened in 2022 aggressively. So they know he exists. They know his influence. This is not a secret. The reason that they tried to ignore it is because they didn't have a candidate that could actually go in there and do anything about it. So they had to ignore it. They couldn't, like, all they could do was this incredibly, harnessed, well-crafted, nonsensical interview on Call Her Daddy for an hour, where they have them fly in.
Did you watch the whole thing?
No, 5 minutes of it, just because I wanted to see how it went,
Yeah.
But I mean, so they know this space exists, and let's be honest, the podcasting alternative, whatever media space thing that we're in right now, is bigger than the mainstream. It is. I mean, in terms of singular, total listens, views, impact that it has. Yeah. Rogan is bigger than anything that you could do on TV, like literally anything. So I think that they knew it existed. They just didn't have a candidate that can talk long form in that environment, come off as personable and intelligent and thoughtful. They just couldn't do it. And this is why, despite the fact that Rogan had an open invite, they said, nah, we're good. Yeah. How about you come to us? We'll give you 45 minutes, and we'll make sure that these answers are scripted, and we won't go live. He's like, fuck you. Yeah. Well, and he could. He literally has fuck you money at the next level. Exactly. This is the next level. So within this wild, wild west of open information market, how is consensus formed, and how is authority granted to somebody? How does leadership occur? And how is Trump... What can we expect from the Trump administration this time around, if he's pulling people and making decisions based on the feedback that he's getting in this other space environment? Do you have any thoughts on that? Because things are developing so quick, and we see the GOP trying to, the old guard trying to batten down against him. Right. Because the immune response of this system, this bureaucratic system, is very strong, and I think it's correct to identify that it's under threat. But what does Trump have? How does consensus form? How does authority work? Well, I mean, that's a much bigger question as to how authority works. But I think that I'm very optimistic about the second term, because he's already, I mean, he had Mike Pompeo on the campaign trail on the last campaign event, speaking at the last campaign event right before the election. I mean, that is about as strong a sign as you can get that Mike Pompeo is going to be somewhere in his cabinet. And then a few days later, thanks to probably the internet authority that you're talking about, the consensus that was formed around, Pompeo and Haley, he's like, never mind. Thank you for your service. We're moving on. And I was like, wow, all right, this is something else. Like, I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. It's going to be just awash in disastrous messes. There's no doubt about that. But if you can get rid of the worst of the worst, I mean, Mike Pompeo tried to have Julian Assange assassinated in the Ecuadorian embassy. He is a biggest piece of garbage on the planet as far as I'm concerned. So I am thrilled that he's out. Nikki Haley, I mean, just the neocon warrior princess. She's just not a single original thought in her mind. She's just like, what is the war that you want me to back? I will back it. I will sell it to the American people. She's Joan just terrible.
Bark, 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 bark. Yeah.
So to see both of them kicked out is fantastic progress. It's not enough. We don't know who's going to actually be in his cabinet. But I think that this next big fight is Senate leadership. And if they can get, even though I'm not a huge fan of Scott either, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Like, this is politics, right? We're always going to be dealing with the imperfect over the awful. But, Vivek Ramaswamy, Tucker Carlson, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, all of the people that I respect in Trump's orbit are all saying it's got to be Scott. So I'm giving them, my support that I can.
Yeah. So what's your process of analyzing the news and then deciding what's important to you? And I know that you're kind of burnt out. You said we opened with you like being a little burnt out, but like what's key and how do you make the decision on what you focus on?
I just do it based off what I'm interested in. Honestly, like what I think is important. So I guess, everything kind of runs through the lens of libertarianism to be honest, like to a certain extent, in that, my background is finance and I'm very anti-war. So if there's war news,
but there's a lot of money in war. So, I mean, aren't you giving up a lot of profit?
That's destructive wealth creation. That's not actual wealth creation. The little broken window fallacy, if you will. But anyway, so those are the topics that like I think probably interest me most naturally are economics, finance, and geopolitics. So I think that's why I'm perfectly suited for this world, because these topics interest me naturally. And for most people, I think most normal people, those are not the highest level of interest. So it's very easy for me to sort through, what matters and what doesn't, because I've been covering these topics before I was a podcaster for years and years.
Yeah. So what can one man do economically? Like what is Trump being handed, and what would you have him do, or what needs to happen? Like when we talk about the economy, like what's the tiered issues? Mortgages, debt, blah blah blah.
Yeah. Well, debt is the number one issue when it comes to the economy, in my opinion.
Like the debt, or just American debt, like broadly?
No, all debt. I mean, the world is quadrillions of dollars in debt. Like we are drowning in debt, and we are. Ron Paul warned about this back 20 plus years ago. He did it before the 07-08 implosion that happened that ended up bankrupting Bear Stearns and a bunch of other. I'm blanking on the names. It's been so long of these banks. But yeah, I mean, we kicked the can. Like we didn't actually deal with the issues that existed in 08-09 because they did the TARP bailout and $800 billion, and they kicked the can down the road, and then they drove interest rates to the ground, and then they kept them basically at the zero bound for over a decade. And what happened as a consequence of that is that all of the consumers and corporations took on astronomical amounts of debt, along with every government all over the world. I mean, huge addition or accumulation of debt. So that is the number one thing that a president needs to deal with. Now, unfortunately, Donald Trump is not equipped for this at all. He is a guy who built his fortune off of debt. And I understand this intimately because I was a real estate developer too. And this is how you make a fortune in real estate, is you take on debt. So from Donald Trump's perspective, there's nothing wrong with debt. This is all good. This is normal.
Debt is good, a la greed is good, kind of.
Well, I just think, I mean, there in a certain regard, he's not wrong. When the Federal Reserve is manipulating interest rates and keeping them below what the market would naturally set them at, it is actually foolish not to take out a loan. But think about what a terrible moral quandary that puts you in. That in fact, being in debt is the smarter thing to do than to pay cash for a house. That's stupid. You don't ever want to create a circumstance where where you're telling someone, hey, you want to owe people money. That'll make you more wealthy. But that's actually how the paradigm works. Because if I'm able to borrow for 30 years at 3%, I mean, that's just so ridiculous that you could ever borrow money for 30 years at 3%. That's so crazy. So anyways, I do that. I go out and I buy a property, and then because I didn't pay cash for it, even though I had the cash to buy it, I'm now able to invest that in the stock market at 6 or 7 or 8%, and I make that spread. So you just don't want to ever create that dynamic. But that would be the number one issue. I just don't think Trump's going to do anything about it. Just being totally honest.
Can you help me get my head around the debt issue? It's just a bunch of digital ink at this point. Who owes the debt to who? Everybody owes it to each other. So it's just kind of or is it saddled on the future somehow, like the future generations? Or
well, I mean,
does it exist, or is it just kind of like this thing that kind of doesn't exist? It's a promise.
No, it exists.
Okay, it
exists. I mean, if you believe in contract law, which I do, this debt very much exists, and most of it is held by consumers, like just regular people. They buy T-bills, treasuries. That is a IOU from the government. That's a loan that you're giving the government, essentially. Obviously, foreign governments have also historically bought a lot of our treasuries. Corporations buy a lot of our treasuries. So, this is all real stuff. If you default on that and you just tell all these people to kick rocks, well, then they default on their debt, and then they tell their creditors to kick rocks, and then their creditors go bankrupt, and they tell their creditors to kick rocks, and you're talking a full-on global debt implosion. Okay, this is very real. So when people say well, if we owe them money and they owe them money, it's yeah, I understand what people are trying to do. They're trying to basically simplify this down into well, let's just write it all off. We all owe money, so just forget about it. No, the whole system would just absolutely collapse if you did that. And I think it probably will happen eventually, or they will go hyperinflation to try and deal with it. But it's not going to be fun to live through. I promise you guys, it's not going to be fun.
Well, where are we right now? I guess you can't tell the future, and anything could happen, but where are we right now? And are we at a historical moment economically where things can shift towards the better, or is there any good option or path from right here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reason for optimism, actually. I'm a big Bitcoin guy, so I think that if the federal government wants to implement Bitcoin into its holdings, which Trump floated that idea on the campaign trail, and then try and kind of make it a supplemental to the US dollar in terms of reserve currency or legal tender. I think that's a very interesting idea. I don't know that it necessarily fixes our issues, but I think it could cushion us potentially. If you turn Bitcoin into the reserve currency, of the world, and you own 10% of it, which the federal government absolutely could acquire, and then you basically just default on your debt, it's an interesting idea. I have no idea what you're talking about. Is it kind of like Tarzan? Letting go of the dollar and then now I don't know what you're talking about.
I just don't know how this one made up currency that people believe has value and treat like it has value, so it has value, can swap out for this other currency that people believe has value, the USD, or the US dollar. Yeah, how do you swap that out? This is. We don't have to dwell on this if you can't get it into my head, because I feel like
sure. So I think that Bitcoin has more value than the US dollar because there is at least limited supply. And there's also the network effect where people have adopted it and are are using it as an enormous store of wealth. And it's actually a deflationary form of savings where it increases in purchasing power over time, whereas the US dollar for 100 years straight now has been an inflationary where you lose purchasing power. So I think it is preferable to keep your savings in a deflationary asset, one that will continue to increase in value. Obviously, that's what you're doing as an investor. You want to always make more money, right? You don't want to lose money. It's the same concept when it comes to currencies or a store of value. So I think that's it's just an interesting idea. Like this is super high level, and I honestly I can't tell you how that would play out. And like it could actually it could be disastrous potentially. Like so I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying you were talking about like is there reason for optimism? Yeah, and I think like that is an idea that I know they have floated to him. Some of the people in the Bitcoin world have floated to him, and I think it's interesting. Obviously, El Salvador is taking that bet. Like they made Bitcoin legal tender. They acquired a bunch of it. You've got a bunch of I'm blanking on his name, the leader of that corporation that spent put all of their reserves into Bitcoin. They're basically like a Bitcoin bank at this point. And they've benefited from it tremendously. Bitcoin's at an all-time high right now, and no one's even talking about it, which I got to point out real quick is a very interesting phenomenon, because if you remember the last time Bitcoin got north of 70,000, it was just like wall-to-wall news coverage.
Talking about,
it was like, but now it's over 80 and no one even talks about it. And I think that's kind of what Bitcoin does, is like it just continues to take a step up this ladder as more and more people adopt it. And there's only 21 million of these things, so we'll see how it if it ever becomes actually readily usable in terms of replacing the dollar on a day-to-day basis, which as of now it has not done that. Sorry, that was a total tangent and rant. I apologize.
No, I love it. And thank you very much for just diving into this stuff and the way that I do, just kind of spider webs and shotguns. It looked to be the case that Donald Trump was the first presidential candidate to take libertarians seriously.
Yep.
How did he hone his message, and how could he potentially be like the most libertarian candidate in this modern era? Like, what would be libertarian, and why is libertarianism like the way to go from your point of view?
Oh, well, now you threw too many questions at me in one. But I will say, I think that he courted libertarians, one, because I think his orbit has a lot of libertarian instincts anyways. Like the America First thing is largely a libertarian pitch. Like you're saying like, oh, you want to have a strong nation that with a strong economy that focuses on itself first, and it doesn't tax its people into oblivion, and you don't want to have endless wars, and you don't want to police the world. It's like, well, that sounds pretty libertarian, doesn't it? So I think that the people think that it's totally strange bedfellows, but I think that there's a lot of reason that it kind of was logical. Like, yeah, that seems like an alliance that makes sense. And then from a more shrewd, calculating, vantage point, if he doesn't agree with us at all sincerely, well, the election margins are 2% and 3% and 4% and less in most states, and libertarians vote that much, so they needed us. So like that's the more I guess cynical analysis of this is like they courted us because they needed us.
Why is libertarianism kind of a niche thing from your point of view?
That's a hard one. I would blame public schooling. It's bizarre. It's bizarre to me mainly because libertarianism is what our country was founded on. Like, it's what our founding fathers were doing. So that I think that's the thing that's most mystifying to me as to why it's not more popular. But in fairness, I do think it's a lot more popular than if you look at election totals. Like if you see the libertarians and they do, like I think in 2016 we got 3% of the vote or something like that. But in reality, like I honestly believe 15 to 20% of this country is libertarian. Like they just vote Republican because they don't want to, scare quotes, throw away their vote. I don't think we're as much of a minority as it looks like based off of federal elections. But obviously we're not in the majority either. So.
Is there kind of a typical libertarian, or like if libertarians, if you're just spitballing and you say that libertarians are 15% of the population, what are they doing? Like, I guess they're in finance, they're in tech. Like, what kind of people?
Oh no, it's everything. I mean, I would say that most of them aren't working for the government. But actually, in the military, there's a ton of libertarians, like a ton, especially military veterans. Because they get home and they've seen the wars for themselves and they go, oh, no, we were lied to. Like, this was not what I was told it was. So I think there's libertarians in all walks of life. Like, it's not, but then there's also a unique for like the people that don't just consider, like, don't just agree with libertarians, but actually like read libertarian literature, Mises, Rothbard, Hoppe. Like, those are very unique people. Like they have to have an inclination towards, finance, economics, monetary history, geopolitics. Like, these are things that are just, as I said earlier, like, most people aren't interested in that stuff. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. Is like, are you?
It's pretty nerdy stuff.
Yeah, it's nerdy. You have to be. Yeah. Either you have to be nerdy or high IQ or autistic or somewhere in that spectrum, pun intended. To have it make sense to you. So I think that they're very unique people. They're my people though. So even though we fight a lot, I love them.
You have the porcupine right behind you. I
exactly.
know the symbol. What do you think is the likelihood? I don't want this episode necessarily to age terribly. So I want to
let's make it evergreen, baby. Let's do it.
Yeah, right. So Trump's coming in. He seems to have a mandate, and it seems like there's overtures of actually limiting the government somewhat. Maybe not. I don't know if the government's going to allow that to happen or not. But what do you think is like realistic? Like, what's impossible and what's probable? Just merely improbable. Like, what's realistic? Man. Like ending the Fed, IRS stuff, Department of Education. Do you have any? Ideas about that?
That's feasible. It's feasible.
It's possible. But
it's not going to happen. Like you could do that. You absolutely could. But I think like my all right, let me just be totally open and honest about this. My natural inclination is to trust politicians zero and expect the worst. That's my initial.
Is this
framework.
A daddy issue? Does this come down?
No. Okay. This is history issue. This is me understanding history. These people are scumbags and they hate us and they lie and they spend and they kill and they bomb and they don't do anything that they promise. So you're asking me to give a rose-colored glasses optimism to what Donald Trump's going to do. It's hard. Now let me do that. Now that I've prefaced it with I don't trust these scumbags at all, now I'll tell you what I think might happen. I think because of his orbit, I think that RFK Jr., if he actually implements him in terms of HHS and going after the COVID origin and the lockdowns and all that insanity, like that has the potential to open up like real CIA black ops stuff. So I don't know if they'll do it, but like they have a clear mandate from the American people to do so. So will he? I don't know. He has a clear mandate to abolish income taxes and replace them with tariffs. He proposed that on Joe Rogan's show just before the election. I don't think he'll do it, but I think he has a mandate if he wants to try and formulate things in that direction. I think he's got a clear mandate to end the war in Ukraine, and I think he will. I think he has a clear mandate to end the war in Gaza, and I think he probably will, even though I don't think that'll happen as fast as he'll end the war in Ukraine. So I think that all of those things are possible. Obviously, I'm trying to be clear on the things that I think are likely and those that are unlikely. I think that he'll spend more than he'll promise a balanced budget or cuts, and he'll probably end up spending more. Which is unfortunate because we really need to get our debt under control, as I opened this entire conversation with. But I think that he will defend the border. He will end the wars. Yeah. That's about like what I think is realistic as to what he'll do.
Yeah. The COVID stuff is really interesting take. it would be a good thing to understand what our government was doing and how it thought, but there's also just a reality that the government doesn't want to let us know, and there's probably a reason why they used tech companies to squash even just asking questions or talking about it. But what is in that black box?
Am I allowed to say it?
Yeah, if you were allowed to say it,
okay.
What if that is pulled open, what are we going to find?
Well, I am personally convinced that it was bioweapons research that was being ran through a cutout after. In fact, credit to Barack Obama, he banned gain-of-function research. Instead of actually listening to Barack Obama, Anthony Fauci outsourced it, and I think working in tandem with the CIA, used EcoHealth Alliance out of the UK to fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which, by the way, this was not just happening in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This was happening in Fort Detrick, Maryland, in Canada, and Ukraine, all over.
In the United States.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the reason it was outsourced, is because it began here, and then it was forbidden and criminalized, and then it was offshored. And I think it's crystal clear to me that COVID-19 was a bioweapon. There's no doubt in my mind. Now, the only question I have is, was it released on the world intentionally? I don't know. And I pray to God that that's not true. But the behavior, the censorship, the lockdowns, the mandates, it makes me feel like it was intentional. It makes me feel that way. I'm not saying that it is.
I mean, if you were just writing a science fiction novel about it, pure speculation.
Yeah, I mean, I think
why would you develop a worldwide virus? Would you not try to target it to like?
I think it was targeted. It was targeted towards the elderly.
Okay.
I mean, it really only killed old people. Like it hardly killed any young people
by
at all.
design, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so.
For population control reasons?
I think that's part of it. I also think that because of the rollout, you got to test a bunch of things. You got to test people's tolerance to tyranny and totalitarianism. I mean, what we went through was totalitarian, dictionary definition totalitarian. So we're the land of the free. We would never accept totalitarianism unless we're lied to, unless we're told that there is a airborne pathogen that you can't see or taste or touch, but you have to hide to stay safe. Now what will you accept, Ben, given that you don't know what you're up against? Well, the answer is a lot, apparently. The American people will accept a fucking unbelievable amount of tyranny if they don't know what's going on. So I think you get that. It's basically a focus group of the entire world where you get to test on a national basis, every country all over the world, who will deal with this nonsense and who won't. Then you also get to have an unbelievable sample size of mRNA innovation and what these vaccines can do in terms of both gain of function research. So you have the virus research side and you have the vaccine side. So I think there's lots of reasons for it. I think then, obviously there's a potential for it being population control with the elderly and wiping out people who obviously are takers from the system as to those that contribute taxes. I mean, we're going full Alex Jones here. You asked me, so I'm giving it to you.
No, it's fine. Let's float it. Let's float it.
So those are, and then you also have the potential for, like, it's clear to me that Antony Blinken and the U.S. State Department wanted war with Vladimir Putin. You have this research that is likely happening in these biolabs in Ukraine, which are old USSR facilities. Then you have Putin, who's talked about this, by the way, which never gets to the American people, that he thinks that they were doing bioweapons research in those facilities, and that was part of the reason that they invaded. So I think that COVID-19 probably ties into bioweapons research that was, in some way connected to that intention for war against Russia.
And you think RFK has the will and the willpower, or the power to open some doors?
I think he wants to.
Leak some documents,
I think he wants to. I don't know that he will. And the reason I say I've lost a little bit of faith in the guy is because I don't think that you're able to understand the history of the war between Russia and Ukraine as well as he does, and then come off so callous towards the Palestinian argument in the Israel-Palestine divide.
Like the occupied.
Yeah, like just the nature.
Yeah,
just the nature of what they've dealt with the Palestinian people, since the 50s. Like this is 70 years of oppression, and it's just rough. And to have such an incredible capacity to understand the nuanced history of Ukraine and the State Department involvement there and everything like that, and then to just be like, the Palestinians are the most pampered people on the planet, which is something he said at one point. And I'm just like, what? Like that? There's just no way you can actually, if you understand anything about this. Like, I'm not saying that they were right to attack or anything like that, but like, you think they're the most pampered people on the planet? This open air prison? Are you out of your mind? So he lost me there. So now I think that he's compromised. Just being honest, even though I like the guy a lot, I think he's compromised in some fashion, and I don't have a lot of hope that he is willing to tell the truth no matter what on every topic.
Yeah.
I hope I'm proven wrong, and I think that he's got a serious vendetta against Anthony Fauci. I mean, I read his book; it's phenomenal, and he knows where the bodies are buried. He can get to the bottom of this stuff. Will Trump deploy him and give him,
in that direction,
full grace to do so?
Yeah.
TBD. I hope, man. I really hope.
Well, wouldn't it come back somewhat on Trump for empowering Fauci?
Sure. But Trump's got to own that. I mean, this has been Trump's biggest fatal flaw over the past 4 years, is that he just didn't own it. All he had to say at any point was, look, I'm not a doctor. I was surrounded by Deborah Birx and Fauci and all these other lying scumbags, and I had no idea. And by the time I figured it out, I was out. So I'm telling you guys the truth now. I will get you justice. I will deliver you the truth and real discovery, real prosecutions. And I promise you that if he had just done that, I would have forgiven. No, never. Never.
Yeah.
So I think he easily could, but like, can his ego allow it?
Yeah, and
so far,
he doesn't
no.
need to now. I mean, there's other things that he can focus on. Yeah. So,
but if he wants to be a legend, that's how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you focusing on now that let me rephrase it. What was your reaction to Trump winning and winning handily? Like what kind of like has been your reaction last few weeks? And then how has it been like kind of
man, I've struggled with it. I've struggled with it honestly because
you crying just simply on your TikTok?
No crying. Okay. No. I've
shaving
struggled
your head and denying men sex or something. I don't know.
No. I have struggled with it in this regard. I didn't think they would let him. I honestly thought, I got to the point where I was so convinced that like this guy is like, they spied on him before he was the president. They attempted to coup him multiple times. They lied about him for 8 years. They described him as fascist, totalitarian, tyrant leader. I think they took a couple runs at him, like his life. They impeached him on shit that he wasn't guilty of. They tried to put him in prison for 800 years. Why would I possibly think that they're going to let this guy be president of the United States again? Are you out of your mind? So I think that's the thing that I've struggled with most, is just like reorienting and being like, oh, no, like maybe this system, maybe like they can manipulate here and there, but like not enough. So I've been filled with optimism, honestly, that like, like the American people have repudiated not just Kamala Harris and the Democrats, which is important, but like the media, Hollywood, all of the influencers. They've just been like, you know what? We're not doing what you tell us anymore.
It is really astounding how much is stacked against Trump. There was a thread I was reading on X about, like how many pages you have to go down in Google to find a single positive thing about him. Like just the amount of astroturfed negativity that you can't even really blame people. I think it's kind of a mistake because you can't really reach people when you consider them as NPCs, even though I think we're all running a little bit of non-player character programming for sure.
We all have some of it in us. That's absolutely true.
The amount of slop that people have been fed, it's just phenomenal. So I understand there could be some, like reflexive pessimism, like why are they letting him win? Yeah. It's like, are they capable of 5D chess? Have you considered that and thought about
of course.
Like, what?
Yeah, I mean that's what's freaking me out. I'm like, Like I'm not used to being optimistic and hopeful and like, oh, the American people have repudiated all this and they've they've gone against the wishes of the regime. Like that doesn't feel right to me. It feels like, oh, maybe we're being tricked. Maybe Trump's been compromised and and honestly, maybe we won't know until he gets in there and he immediately blows up Iran. Like that could happen.
Yeah. Right.
So I think this is TBD, but I'm choosing against my nature to just remain optimistic.
Well, speaking of optimistic, what's your take on Elon and specifically his role in the election?
I mean, this is the same
and
dynamic.
Now in the government. Yeah,
this is the same dynamic. It's like Elon comes in and he offers us basically free speech again when we were, I don't know if you were on there when it was hell. 2020 to 2022, you couldn't say anything safely. Like you never had any clue. Everyone was just, stepping on broken glass the entire time. Like you just never knew. So he comes in and basically it's the Wild West again. Like there's very little censorship. People still complain about it, but let's be honest, comparatively, it is tremendously better. So, but then at the same time, like this dude's made a fortune off of government contracts. He's got technological capacity. He's trying to create AI and brain chips, and now he's got access to our brains through social media because he bought Twitter and turned it into X. He's got satellites that he's offered to the Ukrainians during war, and then these are extraordinary powers that if it's in the hands of someone who's really good, which I tend to think he is, but I'm not sure. That's great. We need a John Galt.
Right. Yeah.
So
back in the Gilded Age, like there were titans of industry that were kind of Carnegie, Rockefeller. These guys were shaping America, and this is kind of the new version of that. So how do you balance your pessimism with just like mental health? And we can just kind of close out and kind of land the plane and stuff. Like looking at the dregs of society, or like the winds of fate, the changing nature of power, and coming off of 2022. Do you have hope for the American people as a people to stand up to tyranny again? And how do you keep your hope alive? How do you maintain like a connection to some form of reality that's not internet based? I guess is kind of another way of balancing.
Sure. I mean, this is why I almost canceled the interview with you today, is because I need to disconnect from the internet for a while and just go do the gym and hang out with people in person and read a book as opposed to reading Twitter. Like that, I think.
Good luck.
Like that's the hard part, is always finding that balance, because I'm sincerely, I think you could probably tell it shows, I'm very passionate about this stuff. I absolutely love doing what I do, and it's like I feel incredibly blessed to be able to do this at all and to have the audience that I do. It's just, it feels surreal to me. So I try and balance my pessimism with true appreciation for all of the good things in my life and the incredible, reach that I've managed to foster. Like it makes no sense to me. I mean, I did 75 million impressions on Twitter last week or last month.
Wow.
30.
What spicy thing did you say? Or
no,
most
I mean, it's
spiciest thing.
No,
just the amount of engagement that you're generating.
I do 2 million plus impressions every single day. Like that's just how it goes now. So I try and counterbalance my pessimism with real appreciation for all of the good things that are happening.
Gratitude.
And then gratitude. And then I also I look at Dave Smith, my friend, gets quote tweeted by Donald Trump Jr., the son of the incoming president, saying, "I'm on it 100," as Dave is saying, look, it's fantastic that we kept Mike Pompeo out, but that's not enough. We need no neocons in the cabinet. And Donald Trump fucking Jr. says, "I'm on it, brother, 100%. Like, you're telling me you're not optimistic after seeing some shit like that? Like, that's incredible. Dave Smith's just a, shit talking comic. I'm a shit talking mortgage broker.
Yeah.
And we've got relationships. Like, I'm legitimately friends with Vivek Ramaswamy. How did that happen? That makes no fucking sense. So why would I be totally hopeless in this environment? Like, there's just a bunch of like, I don't even understand how we're doing this. I mean, my other friend, Tim Pool, sat down with the president of the United States and interviewed Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You know, like, life is weird and amazing things happen. And like networking and community and all these things, like, it's a really beautiful thing. So I try and, like, as I've said many times throughout this interview, my baseline is to be pessimistic, but I try and also see all of the incredible, amazing things that are happening right now. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of reason for optimism. So
yeah. Well, so it's interesting to go from like a mind space where you have to get out the vote, where there's some sort of targeted thing, like a call to action that you can tell people, like, go vote, or like, this is the issue, like, look into this thing. And we're right off the tail end of that, and people are totally exhausted from doing that and stuff. But from your point of view, like, what's the key thing to be keeping aware of or keeping on? I think that the key, political environment.
Yeah, the key is really applying pressure when you see the swamp, raising its head. Like what we saw yesterday. Like, honestly, if people just follow my Twitter, you'll see what you ought to be doing. Like, because I do what I think we ought to be doing, which is apply pressure when the machine fights back. Yeah. Because I saw they want to do a secret vote for Senate leadership, and they want to put some straight up Mitch McConnell clone swamp monster into leadership position, and I'm like, no. We're not doing that. So then I see all of the same, the usual characters that see the world the same way I do, doing the same thing. And it's like, and then I see all of our followings that are boosting our signal and doing the same thing themselves. Yeah. And it's like people don't understand that actually matters. I know it sounds crazy, but it genuinely matters. If, like, when they leaked the early vote tally for the Senate leadership, and it showed a bunch of people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, people that are allegedly in alignment with MAGA world, that were going for Cornyn. The bombardment of hate that they get for that actually shifts votes. So, like, it really does matter. And I think that if we can win that fight, if we can get a good Senate leadership, get a new speaker in the House that is actually reflective of the actual America First movement that Donald Trump got the mandate for, that's what we ought to be doing right now.
Well, I have to say that your account and your I guess network, it's really refreshing because it is kind of real politic. It's not like you can go in all these different directions when you're dealing with politics, and it gets really tempting to rely too much on ideological just fairy tales about these idealistic things, and we make up labels for each other and stuff. But what really matters and what grounds it is that there are people who make decisions in this world, and we have the opportunity to keep these people accountable and push them in a certain direction. Now, we can talk about what direction and all the things over here, which is important to inform which direction to choose. But it's really refreshing that you guys are like really duking it out with the machine, so-called, and the people that are in the machine. And so it's really, there's a lot of landing, there's a lot of like, there's kayfabe, but like somebody gets hit, and there's a little bloodied eye back and forth,
Well, this is what I love about it, is that, like, and honestly, like, I've lost a lot of my audience because of this, because I decided, I ran for the vice presidency under the Libertarian Party. Like, I am a Libertarian. Like, there's no doubt about that. But in the 2 weeks before the election, I said, look, I'm voting for Trump. I've seen enough. I think that it's so crystal clear that this is the preferable path, and particularly given the candidate that Libertarians were running was just disastrous. So I was like, I'm gonna put my limited influence into this and see if we can, basically create this alliance. And so far, so good. Trump won easily. And I think most Libertarians did end up voting for him. And it's just not just because of my influence. I mean, they think for themselves and they came to their own conclusion. But also Tom Woods and Dave Smith and a bunch of other people came to the same conclusion I did. But anyways, what I'm saying is, like, I used to function basically from the puritanical Libertarian perspective of, like, these people are all evil. We're going to create a third party, and then we're going to get power, and then we're going to destroy the ring. Like that. And it's just like, hey, ain't happening. Okay, it's just simply not going to happen. So we have to find a way to work within this machine, influence it as much as we can, and defang it as much as we can. And I have been, I guess, satisfied with what we have done so far in that regard. That I think that we have a chance to have more influence at the federal level than Ron Paul ever did. And I think people will think I'm overstating it when I say that.
No, insert "it's happening" meme.
Yes, yeah, but like Ron Paul was a congressman for decades, so for me to say that is a bold statement.
Yeah.
That Dave Smith and Tom Woods and Clint and Scott and all these other people could actually have more influence at the federal level politics than a congressman. Are you crazy? I think it's true, because Ron didn't get anything passed. He voted no against everything. They called him Dr. No, and we all loved him for it. But like, we actually have a chance to mold and modify policy based off of influence and leveraging our pressure in that way. And then because of that means that we could have multiple people in the cabinet that are basically handpicked by us. Like that's a bigger deal than a single congressman out of 435. I'm sorry, it is. Yeah. This is not to be disrespectful to Ron. Like, the whole reason Dave Smith exists is because of Ron Paul, and same with me. So I think it's just it's basically like, it's a reorientation of the Ron Paul revolution, that like we have a chance to influence things in a different way, doing it through microphones as opposed to singular no votes in Congress. And we'll see which pays more dividends.
Yeah, cool. Clint Russell, enjoy your work. You're at Liberty Lockdown. Where can people find your work? What are they going to find when they get there?
Yeah, at Liberty Lockpod on X is the primary tool that I use to speak to people. Liberty Lockdown is the show on YouTube, Rumble, everywhere. I don't know what happened with audio downloads, but if anyone's listening to this, that my audio downloads are no longer updating. Like, there was some porting issues.
Like on your podcast or something, or your website or something? Okay.
Yeah. I use SoundCloud, and it ports over to some other sites, and I think that some of the sites aren't getting them. So anyways, I just wanted to remind people, make sure you refresh it. But yeah, that's really it. I do that, and I also do a comedy show, which I won't tell people about. If you become a fan of mine, then I'll let you into the inner sanctum of...
Really? You have a little speakeasy down in Chicago town or something?
Yeah, it's a comedy podcast, and it is very, very racist. And but it's like, but like in jest racism, like 90s racism.
The best kind of racism. Good old blue-blooded American racism.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah. You understand.
Hot mic racism,
So, but if people check out Liberty Lockdown, if you like that, then you'll eventually hear me reference the comedy podcast, and you can check that out. That's the speakeasy in the back of Liberty Lockdown.
Right. Great. Do you have any financial advice for us that we can hold you accountable for?
This is not financial advice.
Okay.
As a former financial advisor myself, I think there's a real chance that we have major economic turmoil in the not too distant future, but I also think that there's a chance that we have a major boom, because Trump comes in and he does what he promises, and he cuts the hell out of regulations, and he gets the economy back churning, and optimism turns up. Like that's all possible too. So but if he does that, then all of the currency that they printed over the past 8 years is going to start to pick up in circulation, which will add to the inflationary pressure. So you'll want to have hedges against inflation. In my opinion, precious metals, Bitcoin, those are good ideas. If the debt situation, which I described earlier in this interview, ends up coming to pass, you're going to have one of the most unbelievable deflationary spirals ever, in which case you'd actually want cash. So my advice to people has been the same advice I've been giving people for 4 years, is to split. You need to hedge. We don't know which direction this Titanic is going.
Okay. All right, cool. Clint, thank you so much for your afternoon and taking some time off to speak with me. It's been really enjoyable.
Absolute pleasure, man, and thank you for being flexible on my pump fake heads.
No, you showed up. I thought we weren't going to do it, and then I got the email. I'm like, well, okay, let's get. So I didn't have my studio even set up. So
dude, I'm so sorry.
Hit the ground running. But
thank you. I've enjoyed this too.
Absolutely, cool. Recording's over.